opinion held by many people. There are some who believe that slavery is natural because ruling and being ruled is a pervasive distinction that one sees all societies practice. But he says others believe that the distinction between master and slave is not natural, but is based on force or coercion. Even in Aristotle's time, it appears slavery was a controversial institution and elicited very different kinds of opinions and responses. And here is one of those moments when Aristotle, as I indicated earlier, seems most maddeningly open-minded. He's willing to entertain arguments both for and against the debate. Aristotle agrees with those who deny that slavery is justified by war or conquest. Wars, he remarks, are not always just. So those who are captured in war cannot be assumed to be justly or naturally enslaved. Similarly, he denies that slavery is always or only appropriate for non-Greeks. There are no, he is saying, racial or ethnic characteristics that distinguish the natural slave from the natural master. And in a stunning admission, he says, listen to this, that while nature may intend to distinguish the free man from the slave, he says, the opposite often results. Nature often misses the mark, he says. Now we seem to be completely confused. If slavery is natural, and if nature intends to distinguish the slave from the unfree, the free from the unfree, how can nature miss the mark? How can the opposite often result? I mention this because such complications should alert the careful reader, right? We're trying to read carefully. What is Aristotle doing in making this seem so complicated? At the same time, Aristotle agrees with those who defend the thesis of natural slavery. And his defense seems to run something like this. Slavery is natural because we cannot rule ourselves without the restraint of the passions. Self-rule means self-restraint. Restraint or self-control is necessary for freedom or self-government. And what is true, he seems to suggest, about the restraint over one's passions and desires is true of restraint and control over others. Just as he appears to be saying there is a kind of hierarchy within the soul, restraint of the passions, so does that psychological hierarchy translate itself into a kind of social hierarchy between different kinds of people. The natural hierarchy then seems to be a sort of hierarchy of intelligence, or at least a hierarchy of the rational. But how did this come to be, Aristotle asks? How is it that some people came to acquire this capacity for rational self-control that is necessary for freedom, and others seem to lack it? How did that come to be? Is this hierarchy, again, a genetic quality? Is it something we're born with? Is it something that is implanted in us by nature in that sense? Or is that distinction something that is created by nurture and education, what we would call today maybe socialization? And if the latter, if this hierarchy of intelligence or this hierarchy of the rational is a result of upbringing, then how can slavery be defended as natural? Doesn't Aristotle call man the rational animal, the being with logos, suggesting that all human beings have a desire for knowledge and the desire to cultivate their minds and live as free persons? Isn't there a kind of egalitarianism, so to speak, built in to the conception of rational animal and political animal? He begins his metaphysics, his great book, The Metaphysics, with the famous opening statement, all men have a desire to know. If we all have a desire to know? Doesn't this connote something universal? That all should be free, that all should participate in ruling and being ruled as citizens of a city. Yet at the same time, Aristotle seems to regard education as the preserve of the few. The kind of discipline and self-restraint necessary for an educated mind appears for him to be unequally divided among human beings. It follows, I think, that the regime according to nature, that is to say the best regime, would be what we might think of as an aristocracy of the educated, an aristocracy of education and training, an aristocratic republic of some sort that governs, where an educated elite governs for the good of all. Aristotle's republic, and I use that term to remind you of Plato as well, but Aristotle's republic is devoted to cultivating a high level of citizen virtue, where this means those qualities of mind and heart necessary for self-government. These qualities, he believes, are the preserve of the few, of a minority, capable of sharing in the administration of justice and in the offices of a city. It seems to be a very elite teaching. Would you agree? Unappealing to us, perhaps, for that reason. Very contrary to our intuitions and the way we have been brought up. Yes? Yeah, you agree with me. But before we dismiss Aristotle's account as insufferably inegalitarian and elitist, we have to ask a difficult question, not just of Aristotle, but more importantly of ourselves. What else is Yale but an elite institution intended to educate morally and intellectually potential members of a leadership class? Think about that. Can anyone get into Yale? Do we have an open admissions policy for all who want to come here? Hardly. Does it not require those qualities of self-control, discipline, and restraint necessary to achieve success here? I will leave aside for the moment what happens on Friday and Saturday nights. Is it any coincidence that graduates from this university and a handful of others not unlike it find themselves in high positions of government, of business, of law, and the academy? Is it unfair or unreasonable to describe this class, as Aristotle might, as a natural aristocracy? So I leave you with this question to think about. Before we reject Aristotle as an anti-democratic elitist, take a look at yourselves. So are you, or you wouldn't be sitting here today. Think about that, and I'll see you next week.